Russillo is here. He makes his debut on This Is Football. Obviously, we've done a lot of work together. He's been on Slow Newsday a million times. I've been on the Ryen Russillo podcast. We've gone abroad before. He's one of my favorite commentators, people I've ever worked with. What's going on, buddy?
Good to see you, man. You got dressed up for this one. Sorry.
I am wearing a t-shirt. I've decided, so my whole thing was that I was going to wear a suit and tie every time I was on linear television. And then I got rained on about a month ago, and I had to change into a t-shirt, and no one noticed or cared, and it actually looked a little better. So I may have abandoned the tie.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, it's gotten real casual. It's gotten real casual over the years.
I'm never going to be like the hoodie guy,
Yeah.
but I think that a suit and a t-shirt, there's a look there. As long as you don't, if you do the wrong way, it's a tough needle to thread, because if you do it wrong, you're Night at the Roxbury. But if you do it right, I think there's a way through. So we'll test it out.
Yeah, I remember, not to go Adnan Virk on you, but Adnan Virk ruined the dress code on Get Up because he wore a Cinephile t-shirt while he was doing the show, which was his movie podcast. And so I showed up kind of with a nicer hoodie, and it was just, you can't do that. I was like, what happened? They're like, the call from on high came down that after Adnan's t-shirt promotion move, we got to button this thing up. And then I remember being like, all right, well, I don't have a change of clothes with me. I'm staying here. I'm in a hotel. I think there's some clothes there. And then I had like a stage director being like, do you want to just wear this dress shirt that he had on? And I was like, I don't actually want to wear your shirt on TV today. So we were able to solve it, but Adnan messed it up for all of us.
We had that at the Ringer before you got there, where we did a live stream, and I want to get the details right, but I believe it was an NBA thing, I think. And Titus, I was on it for my Magic, Schadenfreude. Everybody loved seeing me like react to the Mo Bamba pick and stuff for years. They were always like, oh, the Magic suck again. Let's bring on Clark for 30 minutes. But Titus was on, and so was Roger Sherman. And I want to say it was Roger Sherman. Titus wore shorts, but Roger Sherman also wore shorts. And I was in the control room in the back. And this was like, we had a bunch of producers who were not of the Ringer, but they were around. And I remember just people be like, can we get a blanket? Can we get a blanket on there so that we don't see Roger Sherman's legs? And I'm just sitting there saying, this is TV, baby.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's pivoted into far more casual. But you look nice, so there you go.
Thank you, I appreciate that. You made some news. We're taping this on Tuesday morning, again, because you've told the Megan Markle story before, and I don't need you to repeat it. You've done it before. I've heard it because I listen to everything you do. How do you feel? And I feel like it's gotten not worse, but it's just different in the last year. Anything you say on a podcast can be aggregated very, very quickly. Are you comfortable with this?
Well, you have to be if you talk for a living.
Yes.
That one in particular, I'd already told that story. And really the joke of the story is me making fun of myself. And so that got rekindled, I guess, off the live show because I was with Bill. And it is a nice reminder, though, of like when you're doing a live podcast, you're so comfortable that you're just kind of telling stories and you're feeding off of the audience a little bit. And you can kind of feel it if you've done enough of them where this is flat or this is working and stay here. It's probably the least impressive version of being on a stage that you could possibly do as any kind of performer. Like whenever I walk out behind the curtain for a live show, I'm like, imagine if I did something really cool and there were this many people here. So
you did bring out Chris Paul one time. I was there. It was amazing.
The Chris Paul one was just all timer because I had told the audience, like, hey, we have something planned. No one knew that it was going to be Chris Paul. I usually feel like with athletes in general, if you get your hopes up, you're going to be disappointed. And he was promoting his book and he was actually in New Jersey.
Yeah, he was an hour late.
Right. They were dealing with all this traffic. So I was kind of like filling, which was tough.
I remember.
And it kind of worked.
We went around. Do you remember? It was like we had to you and Cerruti and Kyle had to go into the audience. And then like Juliet and I were there, like, all right, we'll go into the audience. And we just kind of hung out with people for like 45 minutes to stall.
Yeah.
It was an amazing time.
It worked. And then the crescendo of Chris Paul showing up and everything was great. But look, if you talk for a living, it's like, well, you have to have people pay attention to what you're saying. And we could get into like a much deeper conversation about what the job is or isn't and what you want to be when you decide that you want to be on the air. And, when I started off a long time ago now, it was the the comparison that I use is that the line was longer to getting on air, but it was more narrow, where
Right.
now the line is incredibly short, but it's really wide because anyone can just
Yeah.
be on the air. So there's a look, I mean, there's still moments multiple times a year where I'll think that I made a good point and, rounded it out really well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is well thought out. Here are the
Yeah.
counter arguments, which I know either people like it or don't like it when I present the argument to my own argument. But again, when you're doing monologue podcasting, sometimes it's kind of nice to offer that up because you're kind of talking to the thing that is going to try to tear down this whole point that you're building up. And then you see it can be you and you see the 15-second cut. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I said. Like, well, that's not really my point. And
Yeah.
we just move really fast. I think our retention level is lower than it's ever been. And because we move so fast, there can be the downside of like, did you really understand what I was saying?
Yeah.
But the good part of it is if you said something you're not thrilled with the way it looks in an aggregation, there's going to be something else to replace it within 20 minutes.
And you can even change the discussion if you want to. I'll say this. You gave me maybe the best advice I've ever gotten in my career. Think about it all the time. So we're at Super Bowl Radio Row, Miami, and you were getting hounded. I was getting a little bit of, hey, can you come on, give us 5 minutes on Albuquerque, whatever, right? But
Were you an Albuquerque guy? I didn't know this.
But you were like, you did Chicago, yes, whatever the radio you had some friends.
Well,
in
Waddle
Chicago.
and Sylvie, I've
yeah.
loved,
So you did Chicago, and then you did. We were colleagues, so you did me. But in between that, you were saying a lot of no's and whatever. You didn't have a lot of time. And you looked at me, and you said the only thing worse than being asked to do all this stuff is to not be asked, and that one day, one day, you and I are going to walk around here, and no one's going to be asking to do 5 minutes, and that is when we're going to miss having to say no to all these things. And I think about that all the time. Whenever I'm like, this is a little much, it's like, you know what? I'm being asked, and that's a good thing. I don't even know if I say yes any more than I would if I hadn't heard that, but I think about appreciating it all the time. There's going to be a day where Albuquerque is not like, hey, man, can you come on? Can you talk a little Steelers?
Because Radio Row is its own thing, and you know how much I love Brian Curtis. He's like one of my favorite guys just in media in general. And he loves Radio Row. Like, I don't know if he's got a book in the works. I don't know who would do the deal on the Radio Row book, but he loves talking Radio Row. And, I used to always, because when I was in local radio in Boston, we went down and we did the Pats Texans the Houston, it was the Pats Carolina Super Bowl, and then the Pats Eagles in Jacksonville, which is still the worst host city that I've ever been to. Just because it just couldn't do it. It couldn't do it. Like, they did a new stadium. They're like, here's your Super Bowl. And then everybody's down there going, this is out of hand.
This is it. Yeah.
And so when you're doing local, it's like, hey, we can get like, I'm just trying to think of like a really good one. Like, we can get Mark Bavaro, who's here with Pepsi. And be like, oh my God, we can get 7 minutes with Mark Bavaro. Like, yes, and you're just watching people work the room and they're walking around. And then I'll never forget, like, Jesse James from Monster Garage was there promoting Monster Garage. And I really, for whatever reason, I had a massive Monster Garage phase. And I like that Jesse James was like this non-traditional TV host. Like, he's just the antithesis of what you would think of, like, let's give this guy a show. And that's why it worked. And Discovery was doing some really cool stuff. And then they came by Radio Row to promote the show, and he just didn't want to do anything.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, don't show up to Radio Row with hundreds of stations from all over the country that are here for one single reason, because this is all an agreement. Yes. We're going to be here and pretend we care about your product. We're going to hope the audience likes the interview. You're going to get the promotion. And sure, you're looking for, like, to go on a cow herd or whatever, the biggest shows were at the time. And certainly now, still with Colin, who's coming over today. So I don't want to make it sound like
no big deal. Can you say hi to me? For me?
Yeah, I will. Well, for you and to you.
Hello. Yeah, please.
So whenever I would see that dynamic, I would just go, you can't show up to this and pretend you're too cool when don't go in there. If you don't want to be bothered, don't show up to Radio Row. And it's such a strange ego dynamic that I would see every year.
We had DK Metcalf on Friday of the LA Super Bowl, and we start off. And when I was at the Ringer, I love to include younger people because I thought it'd be good for, like, hey, let's bring in Ruiz for this and Solak for this and Nora for this. It was me and Nora. And so it was Friday, and I said, so, hey, DK, just big picture thoughts on the game. And he was like, yeah, I don't really want to watch this game. I don't really care.
Good
And
start.
yeah, it was a good start. And then literally he was like, I'm probably going to watch Euphoria. And I remember just like, I was like, let's just, for the next like 6 minutes, because it was supposed to be like 15 minutes. I was just like, all right, let's just kind of see where we're at here. Like I remember stretching it out a little bit, but I ended it quite early because DK didn't want to watch the Super Bowl, didn't care. Sometimes you get that. So there you go. All right, let's get to football. Hey, are the Chiefs? I was thinking about this on Sunday. That the Chiefs are the most annoying team to play against in 20 years because it's the Doinks. They get one more yard than they need to on 3rd and 4 always, and it's always on a Travis Kelce route that isn't a play. Like it shouldn't happen. Mahomes gets the ball out a split second before your defensive tackle mauls him. Sometimes he takes the hit and completes it anyway. His speed in the pocket is just one step faster than it needs to be, even when he's rolling it out. Like, it's unbelievable. But to me, I think we're getting to a place, and this happened with the second Patriots run, where the Patriots were take proof, and nobody wanted to say anything. And I kind of feel like the Chiefs are there because there's not really any. You can't call them frauds. You cannot say, oh, well, they're in all these close games. That's a red flag because they've proven to be supernaturally good at winning close games. They just know what needs to be done on the football field. And I kind of feel like you can't even really discuss them anymore, Ryan. Like, there's nothing more to say because they're probably going to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, good luck picking against him because,
Yeah.
and thank God I'm not an AFC West fan of another team. It's kind of like the Steph thing where,
Could you imagine?
Right, like if you're a Lakers fan or you're a Houston fan, the one team that was trying to knock them off the top of the mountain, which is why I kind of begrudgingly, even though I didn't love the team, I respect the hell out of what Daryl Morey and the Rockets were trying to do because it's like, all right, everybody else is taking a pass during this Golden State prime, and we're going to try to go for it. And so rooting against something that's this much fun is just brutal. And that there's millions of fans everywhere that can't stand this anymore. And the theories about how they get gifted all this stuff at the end, it's like, it's if you dig through it, it's kind of first of all.
Of course. Same stuff with the Patriots. There's always the Patriots are getting all the favorable calls. Maybe it's because they have a 53% advantage on every play, and that reveals itself many times over 18 weeks. Like, it was just stupid.
Right, and then they're most prepared. Like the Belichick teams were the most prepared football teams.
And they understood the rules. They understood the rule. Like, that was the whole Mike Lombardi thing. Like, they don't fumble out of the end zone because Belichick teaches his guys to keep the ball in at the goal line so they don't fumble out of the end zone. Like, they had these little edges. That's called coaching.
I couldn't believe that one example. And I, when I was living there and I wasn't covering the team, it's not like I was down there every single week, but it was just, I was doing TV shows. I was doing the daily radio. So you'd be talking to people that are around it all the time, and just the level of detail and level of preparation. It's like, I just wonder how many coaches, like, is that done now post Belichick? Like, will coaches continue to do those things? And I think wasn't it the Seattle play where it was out of the back of the end zone, and then Patriots players started tweeting, like, I knew that rule. Bill made us do, like, a Rosie Colvin posting something being like, yeah, I know that Bill made us drill that before the season every year. And you're going, this is why, on top of having the best quarterback ever, this is why they have those annoying wins because one, they trust themselves. Winning sort of breeds that confidence. You can't just organically have it based on nothing. But that's this mode that the Chiefs are in right now. So like when I'm watching that game against the Chargers, I loved that game. I thought it was incredibly physical. I loved the nature of like depth charts being tested in that one. I'm in love with the Chiefs linebackers. I think Veach is just so good, and how he reinvented themselves on the offensive line, although certainly there's still issues there post Tampa, and then decided to kind of take like their financial gap year and reinvent themselves defensively with all these young players. And that's the flexibility that somebody like Mahomes affords you, because you know you have this massive advantage with the guy every single time. They were even talking too on the 3rd and 7 conversion with Kelsey, where Mahomes was like, yeah, like, let's not kneel, like, give me a chance here. It's like,
Yeah.
was that the quickest discussion Andy Reid's ever had with the quarterbacks before
Yeah.
play? So rooting against something that is so incredible and that I
Yeah.
appreciate so much, I mean, it would be painful because it always goes wrong. And like, the last little thing that I would add to it is that I still feel like the Steelers, out of the depth of the top of the AFC, would be a surprise team to represent the AFC, because I'm going to have a hard time picking Russell Wilson against some of those other quarterbacks. If it turns into a Lamar rematch, if it's Josh Allen, if it's Mahomes. But if you're a Steelers fan, you're probably watching that game on Sunday night
Yeah.
thinking, like, we can't
It's
beat
gettable.
them. Like,
Yeah.
we can't hold them to one less score and beat them with the way that we're designed right now. But it's like, okay, fine. You want to pick them? You want to pick against them at their place, the playoffs? Good luck.
Hey, this Eagles team. So Brandon Graham goes on. Was it a Chris Long event yesterday? I think I saw
Yeah.
with Connor
Yeah.
Barwin. Yeah,
Yep.
and maybe says too much. He walked it back, but he kind of hinted that AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts are not buddies anymore. And he when he walked it back, he was saying I should have talked to them. I was just kind of guessing because obviously got hurt a couple weeks ago. And again, talking about live audiences, you just get too comfortable, and all of a sudden you're so well, yeah, these guys aren't friends anymore. Oops. And because again, you want to give, it's like what we're saying, you want to give them something. They came out to whatever the restaurant is. They're eating wings. They got a pitcher. Let's give them something. And then all of a sudden you accidentally say AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts aren't friends anymore. It just seems to me, because the vibes on the Nick Foles team were like the best ever. And even 2 years ago, they basically had a victory party when they beat the Giants. If you remember, Howie Roseman's on the field celebrating. That was a Nick Sirianni mean mugging to the camera game. Like, it just felt like the vibes can get so high in Philadelphia, but they can also get in a tailspin that it seems really hard to get out of. Like, we saw that with Doug Peterson. Now we see that with a Super Bowl contending Eagles team where the vibes seem off. I don't understand this. Can you help me?
I don't understand it either, because I did a little NFL audit on this year's Eagles team versus last year's Eagles team. All right. So if you'll allow me,
Please.
opponent yards per play, last year 25th, this year first. Yards per play on offense, pretty similar, 12th, 13th last year. Now, here's where the AJ thing may come in. Percentage of pass plays. Last year, they were passing on 55% of downs. They also weren't as good defensively, so it kind of correlates, right? This year, they're last in the NFL on percentage of plays that are passes. They're passing at 43% of plays. But yards per attempt is up this year. Yards per carry is way better. The O-line is terrific. Time to throw for Jalen. Their point differential last year, they were through the entire season +5. Right now, they're +108 with a full season to go. Last year, we knew, despite the record and the start, something was wrong. Like,
Yeah.
we liked the record. We didn't like the team, especially based on post Super Bowl expectations. I love this team. I don't care about the Carolina game. I thought the Cincinnati win, because Cincinnati's probably the best sub 500 team I think I've ever seen. Granted, the defense isn't great, but to me, Cincinnati's a very tough out. And that was a moment earlier in the year where I'm like, man, I think Philadelphia may have this rolling, because after the Tampa loss, considering the rematch of the playoff game, you're like, what is wrong with these guys? All the summer stuff. People think Sirianni's going to be out. They are one of the best football teams in the NFL, but receivers are selfish and they don't pass as much. And AJ's 56th in targets. Granted, he's got the 10 games to most of the guys in this category that have played a full season. And I don't know anything about the personal dynamic, but I almost feel like, oh, hey, a receiver said something that seems divisive. A receiver said something that basically is about them not benefiting enough. Like, I am so numb to it now, because I can also understand, like, hey, what's your job? Well, we run a lot, and to make sure the defense is spread a bit, I just sprint and don't have a ton of balls thrown my way. Now, granted, like, it's not like no one's ever throwing the football. You could even get to some of the Jalen Hurts profile throws that maybe it feels like on the field there's some limitations on where he's going to pull the trigger. But whatever it is, they're a much better football. It's not even close comparing this team to last year's team. So I wouldn't worry about it, because it's just what receivers seem to do. And it's 53 guys on a team too. Like, what?
Yeah.
I don't care you're not summering together. I don't care. I don't care about any of this stuff. Like, have you ever worked at anywhere where you get along with everybody else?
Just on the Ryen Russillo podcast. I sat next to when you're in a college football away game, you oftentimes sit with the families, and I was sitting in front of a pretty good Miami receivers family 2 years ago at one of these games, and like right in front. Okay, so literally on every play, all four members of the family are screaming, "Open! He's open! He's open!" Every single passing play, and it's like that's actually how everybody processes it. Because by the way, there is a window on basically every route that if the
Yeah,
receiver
right.
right? Like there
Sure.
is a way to say yes, he's open for like a split second, and then he should have thrown it earlier, and it's like no, it's impossible. Like it's actually impossible to please all receivers. So I completely get that. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words: Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer: hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app; it's an empire. I have a question. So I asked Daniel Jeremiah this last week, and his answer was surprising. But you watched the college game, you watched the NFL game. I'll give the floor to you. The best 2024 quarterback in 5 years will be who?
I'm still going with Caleb, but I love
Me
this
too.
question because McShay and I did it a couple weeks ago where, granted, look, Penix isn't playing. JJ was hurt this year.
JJ's going to be good.
But with what? And look, the people that I trust really like JJ a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
I would echo what you just said. It's just that it was harder for me because he just wasn't asked to do as much. Like, it's harder for me to make the assumptions when I didn't see it on Saturday, but I'm not studying the tape. I don't have to do the draft. And honestly, not playing the position, I'm not sure that a lot of us fully understand what is being asked of a quarterback on every single drop back. But of the guys that have played, the fact that we're going to get through this entire season and it's still in play that Bo Nix could be the best, that Jaden could be the best, that Drake
Mm-hmm.
May could be the best, that Caleb could be the best. Now, I would still have Nix behind the other guys, but
Mm-hmm.
what they've done this year, and I think Peyton also post Wilson is just thrilled to
Yeah.
have a piece of brand new clay that he can shape and form in the way that he wanted. And that was obviously a disconnect because that was supposed to be the Russell Wilson show, and that changed pretty quickly. So I love the idea that all four have shown enough promise that I think in 5 years, it's not going to be surprised if we're going to pick any of these guys. But my thing with Caleb was really simple, is that I thought he already did the hard things really well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that was his starting point. And I know it's been a mess. I know this past weekend was just an absolute disaster. It's the most important hire of the offseason for any NFL team. And, as bad as it's been at times, I still think there's been a lot of really good moments. And I still think his talent is superior to the other guys we're talking about.
I would default to Caleb too. I just think the Bears are going to screw it up. Like I think the Kevin Warren thing
Is that
is
real,
really
by the
weird.
way? Like, I know Schefter explained it, that Harbaugh wanted it, but is this really that true, that a president would be so worried
Well,
about the headlines and the power dynamic?
I
Because
think it
you might
is.
lose the job if you pick the other wrong guy again. You know what I'm saying? Like, why
Well,
wouldn't you want somebody to be successful?
do you not find it weird he was hired to build a stadium and then there just haven't been a stadium update in 6 months, and all of a sudden he's giving a coaching press conference? Like that's a little weird. I don't know. I just felt like Warren. He was all about the headlines at the Big Ten. He added
The
USC and
alliance.
UCLA. Yeah, I think that I said this to about Jerry Jones over the summer, and it got some traction. Where I said, if you gave Jerry Jones the option, like, hey man, you get a Super Bowl this year, but you can never give a press conference again. He doesn't take the deal because he likes the glitz and the glamour, and he thinks he can win a Super Bowl without that deal, right? He's programming a reality show, as Dominic Foxworth says. I think Kevin Warren would rather be seen as like a great leader and like a great dynamic, like a Roger Goodell heir apparent or something. I think he'd rather be seen as that than the Bears have sustained success on the field. And I know those two go hand in hand, but I'm saying if he had to pick one, I think the Kevin Warren thriving would be the number one overall pick in the Kevin Warren draft.
That just, I
Not
don't know,
good.
that blows my mind, because you're going to be judged on just how well this team does on Sundays. and to not
Ryan Poles
arm
will
them.
be. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. By the way, every Bears stadium update seems it's like the Coyote Stadium thing. It seems completely disconnected from the update before. Like, oh, they're moving to the suburbs. They're going to get a casino. Oh no, they're going to stay there. Here it's like, will someone just wake me up when the Bears have a stadium, please?
I
And
just
a,
want
and a,
Caleb Williams sacked less. I don't care about the casino. I don't care about parking. I don't care about public transit. I don't care about any of those things. I just want him to have just a healthier drop back season.
Completely agree. Hey, speaking of young quarterbacks, so this Bryce Young thing, I think Bryce Young was failed by his receivers and like his center wasn't stepping the ball and all this stuff. Like I think Bryce Young, this isn't fake. And I thought the bar to clear was like, let's show he can stay in the NFL. He should be the starter next year. Do you think there's a lesson in there for us, for teams, where I think we now say like week 6 of a rookie quarterback, we're like, all right, that's it. That sucks. That's a shame. And Bryce Young got benched, looked awful last year, was on like the trajectory. And like, Jared Goff has had that kind of rookie year and obviously had sustained success. Alex Smith famously, year one was like the 3 worst rookie quarterbacks of all time. And maybe this has been updated with Zach Wilson. I haven't looked, but I remember when Jared Goff was struggling, it was Goff, Alex Smith, and Andrew Walter. Remember him from Arizona State?
I do.
Andrew did not make a leap, although there's still time. There's still time. But the other
Right
two
system.
guys, there was a leap there. I think there's a lesson in this Bryce Young thing for anybody.
I don't know if it really means that we can map it out that way. Like, I know what you're asking. Is there a lesson about patience? There's a lesson about us. Like, whenever a team's down 14-0 on the primetime game and everybody's tweeting and be like, and be like, okay. And then it comes back and it comes down to the last possession. It's like, is this your first time watching one of these football games? Like, oh, no way. The other team, because you're really not down 14-0. You're down 2-0. Okay. And so I'm consistently amazed how often people that do this for a living and have watched thousands of hours of this stuff will just be like, oh, the other team scored. We got a game here. And so you can apply the same thing to some of the things that happen transactionally in the league. Like Bryce Young, it's a disaster. It was a disaster last year. They didn't have the right support in place. It feels a little, I wouldn't, I can't compare it to Caleb because the Caleb receiving options were
Right.
so far superior to what Carolina was rolling out there last year, right? So it's bad and it's really bad. And now we see a guy like, if there was the one thing you liked about Bryce, it was his composure. It was a confidence. And when you watched him, he was in control of the football game at Alabama. It wasn't about the throws and the arm strength and all the measurables because he knew he was going to have that. It was somebody that just had a great like mental approach to playing the most difficult position in all of sports. And he looked just shattered. But if you've spent a number 1 pick on him and you've traded up, by the way, for that number 1 pick and used the resources they did, like the idea that he was never, ever going to play in Carolina again, you're like, so you just think it's like Andy Dalton the rest of the year? Of course he's going to play again. Of course. And like, I felt like I was on an island with that one going like, you don't think he's going to get another chance at some point? Like, and by the way, if his stock is this low, why wouldn't you just roll him back out there at some point to see if there's some little bump? By the way, the 3-game bump that they've gotten. So I'm with you. I hope he's the starter next year. He actually looks happy. Like I've watched the entire last 3 games because I'm just really curious about him. So is there a lesson in patience transactionally? I mean, obviously there's a lesson in all the reaction stuff that I've been touching on here. I don't have the perfect model. I don't. Like I watch all these guys on Saturday and I've never been more lost on being definitive about who's going to be good and who's not going to be good. I think the overall start number thing is real. Like when you go through it and you're like, how many games were guys in? Like that's a pretty definitive thing. Like Fields had 22 games at Ohio State. He had a bunch of games at Georgia, but he wasn't really playing.
No.
Zach Wilson had 28. Mac Jones really only had like 16 real games where he was the guy. Anthony Richardson had like 14 real games at Florida. And I remember when Sanchez declared and Pete Carroll's sitting next to him at the press conference, right? Kind of being like, we'd like you to come back because the numbers tell you below this level of start. So I think that's the starting point. I'd want to see how many times a college coach trusted the college kid to throw in the red zone, because I think that's a real defining moment of like, well, if they don't let them throw in the red zone, what does that mean? There's some third long stuff and all that kind of stuff. But I used to always be like, how can you get better at something by not doing it? That was always my argument. Cannell and I would argue about it all the time. He'd be like, you need time. You need time. I think the Aaron Rodgers thing is stupid to compare anything to because Favre wanted to leave every year and then wanted his job back. And then Rodgers And the irony of ironies for a franchise to have back-to-back quarterbacks that are Hall of Famers and legends and then toy with the team's future like consecutive off seasons. So the seasoning there was based on something that I don't know that any other team would sign up for. So I've never been more aligned with, well, I shouldn't say aligned. I am more open now than I ever have been before of just saying, hey, shut it down. You're going to get some reps and we're going to try to get this right
Yeah.
instead of just throwing you out there. Because I always felt like the great ones would figure it out and their confidence wouldn't be shattered because of this. I don't know that there's a bunch of quarterbacks that have been derailed professionally because of that first experience, but I've talked to enough of them that failed that will tell me that's when they failed because of that first. Is it self-preservation or is it accurate? But I'm more open now, Kevin, than I've ever been before. And maybe it's because of Bryce, of just this mental patience that we have to have with what's the most important asset these teams have.
Two quick ones on college football. First of all, I disagree with the BCS. And I know we talked about this. It's more nuanced than you said. They need to expand the playoff. It needs to be 16
Even
teams.
More teams. Exciting.
Yes. Here's why.
Miami? Is that why?
Miami, just to keep expanding until it's Miami. No, Miami's defense, they did what they did. I will say this, though. So I was leaving the Dome last Saturday. And
RCA Dome?
my kid, the Carrier, it's not the Carrier Dome anymore, but my kid, I have good seats. My kid, it's 7:30. It was the first game he'd ever gone through and stayed at. We've been to the Temple game, went to an Army game, and both times he lasted a half. So as soon as the game is over, he's almost 2.
Yep.
He's got to get his jacket on. He's got to get to the car. My wife's looking at me, and she's not like judging, but she's kind of like, if he hits his expiration date here, we're not coming to a football game for a decade. Okay. So I got that pressure on me. And I just tear out of the Carrier Dome. Nobody really gives me because I've got a 2-year-old in my arms. And then he gets to sleep in the car. That to me is my playoff win. So then 6 days later, I'm driving back from TV. I'm in traffic. And I have a meltdown because for the first time I realized Miami lost to Syracuse and it cost us a playoff spot. I was so busy raising a child that I did not have this realization until 6 days later. I'm sitting in traffic. So what I'm saying is that it is having a child and bring him to a game is an amazing distraction for a catastrophic loss. Amazing.
That's rent a kid.
Rent a kid.
Have a booth set up.
Just have a booth and you have the kid. And
if it's a team that has legendarily bad losses, right?
Yeah. And we gave him soft pretzels. He looked very cute. I just feel like if you're if anybody's on the fence about having a family, just remember you get to. And it was funny because I texted Mina and Danny the other day, and I said I have so much respect for you guys doing NFL stuff while rooting for an NFL team because I couldn't watch college football last weekend. And Mina said to me, she said, that's the moment after a catastrophic loss, is the moment you say, you know what, there's more important things in life. And then you just put a picture of your kid on social media. It's very important to be able to do
that. I did see the picture because then it just, I'll admit, I felt for you. And then I was like, oh, well, yeah. Like,
there's more important things in life.
He's got his priorities straight out.
In life. Yeah, I'm not combing through
on the way back and be like, can we get ice cream? No.
There's a kid we offered from the MAC yesterday, Reggie Virgil. I'm just watching his tape because we're on to 2025 because there's more important things in life.
Sell me on 16. Sell me on 16.
So I think that you're going to see more. And again, this isn't a Miami thing, but you're going to see.
I know.
So you've never needed more depth, and there's never been less depth. And I think that we're logo watching way more than we should. And I think that we're going to see more FSUs and more Syracuses going forward. We're going to see teams that just get the top 10 transfer portal decisions wrong. All of a sudden they go from 13 wins to 2 wins. It's going to happen way more than we think. Okay. And the other part of it is I think we're going to see, if you look at Colorado this year, they have 3 to 4 legitimate NFL guys and then not an amazing roster beyond that. Okay. They have, that's the reason why a lot of these guys who follow recruiting were like, well, they're a 3-win team. No, they're not, because they have a top 10 pick a quarterback and they have a generational Heisman winner. And in a sport that lacks more depth than it ever has in history, I think that's enough to win you 9 to 10 games. Okay. So Kyle McCord goes from Ohio State to Syracuse. And so this I'm going to back up here. Kirk Herbstreit used to say this all the time when I was in high school. And Louisville would be playing Miami and Louisville would go up 10 points and he would say, listen, there are two things that happened in the last few decades that have led to this moment where Louisville and Miami can be competitive. This is, the 2003 game, 2004 game. First is the 85-man scholarship limit, where the 103rd guy who would have gone to Nebraska is now going to Kansas State. And that matters, right? And the other thing, my uncle was a walk-on for like a minute at Notre Dame, okay? And he could have played probably, I don't know where he could have played, but he was a pretty good DC area quarterback. He was 19th on the depth chart in the 60s at quarterback. Number one won the Heisman Trophy. So I'm not saying my uncle would have like changed the fortunes of Virginia Tech, but I'm saying the number 4 guy probably would have, right? So that was the 60s. Every decade since, there's been less and less depth. So it's 85-man rosters and it's television, because 30 years ago, you had to go to Notre Dame or USC or Penn State to be on television. And now you get to say, hey, if your son goes to FAU, you're going to be able to watch him in Georgia. You're going to be able to watch him in South Carolina. So the world is flattening. Okay, so all of that stuff. So then the portal and NIL take those two things and inject steroids into them, because now you can be Kyle McCord and you go change the fortunes of Syracuse. Because 20 years ago, Miami plays Syracuse. Well, guess what? Syracuse's quarterback is some 2-star from Utica who can't throw a forward pass beyond 6 yards. That's exactly what would have happened. Instead, they get a former, highly touted, like Elite 11 guy who comes in and just tortures their man-to-man coverage. Okay? So there are going to be 25 teams like that. The difference, in my opinion, between team 1 and 30 in college football has never been smaller, ever. And it used to be massive. And I would say 5 years ago was more massive than it ever had been, because there were 5 schools that got something like 75% of all 5 stars, and 5 stars end up being first round picks. If you just look at, that's the reason 24/7 has 32 5 stars, is because they're projecting the first round 3 years out. And those guys are moving around more. A kid from Missouri who's a 5-star just is portaling out. Who knows where he ends up? But you're seeing that. You're seeing the quarterback position change, because these guys, like whether it's Cam Ward or whomever, are able to find their destiny and then elevate a team. You can transfer 2 or 3 times, you find your offense, all of a sudden your first round pick. There's a reason. I mean, 4 of the 6 first round picks last year at quarterback were portal guys. And I wouldn't even count Caleb Williams because he's more of a traditional follow your coach guy. Michael Penix would not have been a first round pick without the portal, obviously. Bo Nix would not have been even an NFL player without the portal. So you're seeing those marriages. And so this is a long way of saying the 25th team in the country now can win 2 or 3 games in a playoff and get to a championship game. Maybe they'll run into a buzzsaw if it's Georgia. Maybe they'll run into a buzzsaw if it's Oregon, but they can beat Penn State. I would not count out SMU over Penn State in this playoff. And so what I'm saying is the amount of quality teams is way higher than it has been. And I think the 2-loss teams in particular, you're going to want more of those in. And we're going to see that, I think, in these playoffs. There's going to be way more upsets than you think. And then going forward, like the logo watching that we're always able to do with college football and default to, well, I trust Kirby. Well, that's going to be less and less, because Georgia's 3rd best player is now going to go to Kentucky. Third best linebacker is now going to go to Kentucky because of it. And so the world is flat in college football. That's 16 for me.
A counterpoint to expansion. Indiana shouldn't play for a national championship when you beat no one.
So, but here's the issue there. That to me is not about the playoff format. That to me is about conference scheduling. I think what we need to do is have pods in the conferences, and everybody plays each other. So it's not SEC West, SEC East. It's every single year there's a rotation. There's 2 pods, and then the winner of each pod plays in the SEC, ACC, Big Ten championship game. That way you at least get some semblance of, hey, they were in this bracket, everybody played each other, then they played.
I understand the pod thing, but you're also going to have to kind of like project in a way in how you're doing conference scheduling, because look, the big conferences kind of deserve this in a way, or maybe the SEC in particular, because they feel like they had the extra team left out. I'm not in favor of Bama. I like South Carolina better than Ole Miss. The Ole Miss head-to-head puts not a dent, a hole in my argument. I totally understand that. I'm not outraged in the way I have been in other years when this is put together. It's not even about Indiana for me. It is about getting the chance to play for something incredibly special. And I would say most sane people feeling like a team should not get that invitation when you don't have one good win, where you're like, that's a really good win there. Maybe Indiana, finds a way to pull it off against Notre Dame, and then everything will be like justified and all that kind of stuff. But like the conference scheduling part of it with this expansion, like I said, all of this was going to happen. I said it was going to happen years before. I said when they went to 12 teams, we're going to be arguing over these teams that should have no business being invited to a national championship. You're going to have multiple loss teams that you don't really like. There's going to be strength of schedule things that don't happen. And what happened in particular this year with all of these new conferences was that if you go through Arizona State's schedule and be like, how many of the top teams did they play? I don't know. I actually kind of like Arizona State, right? SMU had a different experience. I mean, the fact that the committee could have those teams play each other in a conference championship game, Clemson win the head-to-head, Clemson has the extra loss, so they're behind them. And it's like, well, let's look at their schedule. Oh, wait, Clemson lost to South Carolina where they were driving for a game-tying field goal, tip ball, interception. South Carolina wins. They lose to our number 2 overall seed, the SEC champ Georgia. Maybe Clemson's experience in 24 was different than SMU's experience in 24. And whether it's the Indiana schedule, which at one point prior to the Purdue game, and I don't know how the final standings shook out, but I think they had played 8 of the 9 worst teams in the Big Ten. And if a committee is made up of people that are supposed to have opinions and arguing through this stuff, you would think somebody would have done that, but they didn't do it. Collectively, they didn't do it. Maybe somebody in the room did it, and they didn't seem to care, and they wanted to make it all standing. So to take the issues I have with invitations that I do not think are justified for the 24 season, it's not anti any conference. It's not anti any school. It's not anti any geography. It is simply, and I've said this from the beginning, when we have these teams, I'm like, I just don't feel right about teams being allowed to go to this. So even with the flat line thing that you're talking about, one, I need multiple years to see your scenario play out, because I think some of those guys that are transferring are also going to Georgia, are also going to Alabama, are going to go to Texas, are going to go to Ohio State. So I would need multiple years of results where it would force me to not, like, your brand thing is totally right. Inherently, I don't know how any of us prevent ourselves the same way where you're going to feel a little bit better about the Chiefs helmet than some other helmet, despite the Chiefs being the most diminished version of their offense we've seen in the Mahomes era. I don't know how you humanly remove that from how you'll look at things. So, and to expand it out even more, maybe you're going to be right. Maybe in 5 years, we're going to see all of this balance because of all the factors that you laid out perfectly. But I just don't want more teams.
That's fine. All I'll say is I'll leave it on this because we got to let you go. I think within 5 years, you're going to have a national champion. First of all, what I love about this whole thing is we're gearing towards the one true outcome of college football, which is a national champion that everybody calls a fraud still. Right, like that is what college football deserves, is a national champion where people are like, well, who really, that side of the bracket, really, who they play in conference play. We have that, but then I really do believe that's just a discourse thing. But I do believe in the next 5 years, you're going to have a team that is not considered a traditional power who hits on 10 portal selections and wins a national championship. I'm talking about a UNC. I'm talking about an Arizona. I'm talking about, a school like that where you just think about, okay, they're fine. We'll see what happens with Kentucky, something like that, where they hit on the top 10 portal guys. They get 7 NFL players because they've got some stud in the personnel department who figured this out. Everything comes together. They get the schedule. They win the national championship. That is why I think you expand, because there's going to be more teams like that. That's all.
Look, all of this may happen. But I felt like the push that there is this flattening of the college football landscape, I felt like the push was a very anti-SEC push. I thought it was coming from the same parties. I'm like, oh, okay, this guy who hates the SEC, now he's...
I don't hate the SEC.
I know you don't, but it was the usual suspects where it feels more like, is this an observation, or are you hoping to push this momentum with like propaganda? Because there's nothing, and I'm glad that you did not focus on the NIL, even though you mentioned it. No one tells on themselves faster than the person that thinks that there's now more competitive balance in college football because of the NIL, because the SEC was the only one taking care of its players. You tell on yourself immediately, if that's the thing that you believe in, that now the other power programs can get into finding ways to compensate the top players in the country. Because if anybody, if you know anything about college football, it wasn't just one area in the country.
I agree. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.